The idea for the lyrics to Peace Cells came one morning when Dave Mustaine spotted a magazine on the coffee table in the rehearsal building where they were living. It was Reader's Digest, and inside was an article by Patti Smith. Patti Smith, also known as the godmother of punk, is an American singer-songwriter, poet, and visual artist, one of the defining figures of the New York punk movement. She wrote the line, "Peace sells, but nobody's buying it." Dave thought, wow, that's a really cool idea. Then he tweaked it slightly, "Peace sells, but who's buying?" and wrote the words on the wall with a marker. The idea for the album cover came up during a lunch conversation at a barbecue restaurant in New York, located across the street from the United Nations General Assembly. Ellefson and Mustaine, along with the band's agent Andy Summers, came up with the concept of Vic standing in front of the UN shortly after a nuclear holocaust. The design of the new logo's lettering was inspired by the style used on the poster for the movie Conan the Barbarian. The band began recording at Music Grinder Studio on Melrose Avenue in Hollywood. This time, the budget was $25,000. That allowed them to bring in an outside producer, Randy Burns. He and engineer Casey McMacken worked on the album quickly and intensely. But a split was brewing within the band. Chris Poland and Gar Samuelson decided to raise the issue of finances. They openly stated that Mustaine and Ellefson were making more money and asked why the income wasn't being divided evenly. Dave didn't see their contributions as equal. The rules of the music business were clear. If you write songs, you get paid. But the songwriting credits on the album looked like this. On top of that, to get Chris and Gar's parts onto tape, someone first had to find them. They had to be picked up from some rough parts of town, brought back to the studio, steadied enough to function, and only then could the recording begin. When Metallica's popularity skyrocketed, Dave started receiving $5,000 royalty checks. At the time, that felt like a huge amount, especially considering that the members of Megadeth were still broke. At best, Gar and Chris were making about $200 a week. Mustaine didn't deny that Gar and Chris, with their jazz backgrounds, brought a unique feel to the recordings, but he also believed they weren't putting in enough effort to develop and promote the band. Once the songs for the new album were ready, Ellefson and Mustaine went to Minnesota for a few days to stay at Ellefson's parents' farm and unwind. By then, Capitol Records and Elektra Records were both interested in the band. A bidding war broke out, and Capitol Records won by offering better terms. The band finally received their advance, and their manager rented them a 3-bedroom apartment in Silver Lake, east of Hollywood, giving them for the first time a real home and a proper base of operations. To celebrate the release of Peace Cells, a party was thrown at a Hollywood bar called Firefly. The whole band arrived in a limo. Their girlfriends showed up in a second one, but the night ended in a fight. When it was time to leave, only one limo was waiting outside, and everyone had to cram into it. It turned out that Chris's girlfriend had taken the second limo. Mustaine was furious. A verbal argument with Chris escalated into a brawl. Gar tried to hold Dave back, but Dave broke free and started beating Chris so badly that the driver had to pull over and threaten them to make it stop. Fights like this, where Chris often took the worst of it, became routine.
MTV News.
Back at the apartment, the TV was always tuned to MTV. One day, a familiar melody came on.
You hear it first.
They looked at each other, confused. Half an hour later, the news intro played again. MTV had used the opening of Peace Cells without permission. It turned out the melody had been trimmed just enough to avoid paying royalties. The intro ran on air for 10 years. Still, there was an upside. It constantly reminded viewers of Megadeth, especially since the Peace Cells video was in rotation on MTV and had become a hit. In the fall of 1986, Megadeth were set to begin a tour with Motorhead and Cro-Mags along the west coast of California and the American Southwest. They hired designer Ray Brown to create stage outfits, did photo shoots, and bought new gear. Motorhead were the headliners, but Megadeth kept deliberately stretching their set past the 30-minute slot they were given, so the sound guy would just pull the plug on them. Dave would get on the mic and mouth off to the crowd about it. Motorhead would walk out and physically run them off the stage. And that wasn't the only headache. Motorhead's drummer, Phil Taylor, had his kit mounted on a rail system that ran from the back of the stage almost to Lemmy's mic stand. During his solo, the whole rig rolled forward, then slid back. That setup left no room for Gar's drums anywhere but off to the side, which wrecked their show. The two bands' managers got into it, and eventually Megadeth got bumped from the last 3 dates of the tour. Dave kept a close eye on Metallica's success. Back in March, they had released Master of Puppets, which brought them massive recognition. As Peace Cells was coming out, Dave was preparing to outpace Ulrich and Hetfield in the race for heavy metal dominance. Then he got a phone call from a friend in New York known as Metal Maria. She had worked for Johnny Z when Dave met her during Metallica's East Coast trip. Crying, she told him that Cliff Burton had been killed in a bus accident during Metallica's tour in Sweden. Dave couldn't say a word. He was devastated. Even though they hadn't spoken in a while, he and Cliff had remained on good terms. That same day, Dave picked up his guitar and wrote In My Darkest Hour in one sitting. The music captured his pain over Cliff's death, while the lyrics were inspired by the difficulties in his relationship with his girlfriend Diana. On October 10, 1986, when Megadeth's North American tour began, Lars Ulrich came to see their show in Oakland. He looked deeply shaken. Backstage, Ellefson asked what they were going to do about a bassist, and Lars replied, "Why, do you want a job or something?" At the time, Ellefson took it as a joke, but years later, that question would come up again. At a show in San Francisco, Cliff's parents attended. Dave introduced them to the audience and announced, "The next song is for Cliff." Then they played In My Darkest Hour. On the road, Dave felt better than he did at home. They were playing almost every day in a new city. But the problem of addiction didn't go away. It only got worse. They often had to track down Gar and Chris in the worst parts of each city just to get them to the next show. Conflicts and bloody fights within the band became more frequent, and reckless behavior led to dangerous incidents. At one show, a club worker suggested using pyrotechnics. Dave liked the idea and asked for a charge to be detonated before Skull Beneath the Skin when he gave the signal. That's exactly what happened. Dave nodded, the charge went off, but he had forgotten to warn the rest of the band. Gar, startled, dropped his only pair of drumsticks and scrambled to find them so he could keep playing. Chris fell into a hole in the makeshift stage structure. With their lifestyle and lack of control, the band was walking a razor's edge. Dave believed the potential for disaster was limitless. The only question was, who would be the first victim?